Amen. Well, go ahead and grab a seat. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5 today. We're going to finish up this chapter today, God willing. I want to start with this statement. I want to tell you a story that you may be familiar with. Maybe you're not. But here's the statement. When Jesus seems late in my life, he's inviting me to move from fear to faith. When Jesus seems late in my life, he's inviting me to move from fear to faith. One of the most powerful in-between moments in modern history happened in 1940 during the early days of World War II. The German army had swept across Europe in a lightning advance known as a blitzkrieg and pushed the British Expeditionary Force along with French and Belgian allies all the way to the northern coast of France. Anybody know this? You know this story? It's a great movie about this that came out a couple years ago. All told, there were around 400,000 Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches around Dunkirk. Behind them was the German army. In front of them was the English Channel, and they found themselves living somewhere between desperation and possible annihilation. And something remarkable happened. For reasons that some historians still debate, likely a mix of tactical caution from German commanders with Hitler's approval, the German panzer forces received a halt order. And they paused their advance for about 3 days, starting on May 24th. That delay allowed the British to launch a desperate evacuation effort. Anybody know the name of that operation, by the way? Operation Dynamo. Hundreds of Royal Navy ships crossed the channel, but there weren't enough due to the shallow waters and the damaged harbor. So something extraordinary happened. And many of you know the story. Civilian boats, fishing vessels, ferries, yachts, lifeboats, and little pleasure craft answered the call. Somewhere between 800 and 900 small vessels known as the little ships made the perilous trips, ferrying men from the beaches to larger ships or directly home. When it was over on June 4th, more than 338,000 soldiers had been rescued. At the beginning of the week, it looked like a catastrophe. By the end of the week, it was called the miracle at Dunkirk. But here's the thing that we often forget. When we look back and we read history, it's impossible for us to put ourselves in the story. We're going to find that in the Bible here in a minute. It's impossible for us to feel what they felt, for us to know what was going through their minds. Here's what we forget. The soldiers on the beach didn't know the ending of the story. All they knew was their backs were against the wall. They were living in the middle of the story, which is where all of us find ourselves this morning. You're in the middle of a story. You don't know how the story is going to end. You know how it began, and you know the early chapters in your story, but none of us knows what's going to happen next. We're stuck right in the middle, and some of us in this room find ourselves in between desperation and rescue, and we don't even know it. That's the story we pick up on in Mark chapter 5. Here's the first thing that I want us to see as we dive into this, and it's this. Jesus sees me even when I feel invisible. Some of us in the room this morning feel invisible, right? Some teenagers feel invisible. Most of us as teenagers felt invisible at one point or another. Like people don't see me, people don't get me. Some of us as adults feel that right now. Let's look at Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side. Now, where's he crossing from? You remember last week we talked about Jesus launched from the western shores of the Sea of Galilee, and he went across the lake to the other side where he heals a man, casts demons out of a man. That whole deal with the guy who had demons living in him, and they said their name was Legion, and then Jesus cast him into a herd of pigs, and the pigs ran off into the lake. That's what we dealt with last week. Right? As soon as that deal is over, Jesus gets in the boat from the eastern shores of Galilee and now heads back to the western shore of Galilee. So he's coming back to the part of Galilee where he has spent most of his ministry, where Capernaum and Magdala and these towns all along the western shore, northern shore of Galilee are. So when Jesus had crossed again on the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him as he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. In seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. Now, like I said, I know it's impossible for us to feel this, but sometimes I wish I could read the Bible again for the first time. You ever wish you could watch your favorite movie again for the first time? Wish you could read your favorite book again for the first time and experience not knowing what's going to happen next? You want to feel that tension, that anticipation, that adrenaline rush? Like, I can't put this book down. It's 3 a.m, but I have to know what happens in the next chapter. I wish I could read the Bible that way again, but I can't do that. I know where this story is going. However, maybe just for a moment, we can pretend. Let's do our best to put our feet in the sandals of this good man living somewhere on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. His name is Jairus. He has a daughter who is very, very sick. She is going to die. And to complicate things, the only one who can do anything about the condition that she is in got in a boat and went to the other side of the lake to people who are not our people. I mean, he went to people who are not our people. Those are not our people. Those cities are not our cities. Right? They stay over there. We stay over here. But the last thing Jairus knew, like where did the healer go? Where did the teacher go? He went away. He crossed to the other side of the lake. That God knows only where. But he's last seen in a boat headed to Gentile country. But now he's come back. And they're probably, my guess would be Capernaum. And the news of Jesus' arrival has spread through the town, has spread through the villages around. It is the greatest news that Jairus has ever heard. The one who can do something about my daughter whom I love, who is at the point of death, has come back to our shores. The healer has returned. Now, Jairus knows Jesus. We know this from looking at the text. He knows who Jesus is. Jesus is probably taught in the synagogue where he is also a teacher or ruler in. He's heard him teach, which means he's also probably seen Jesus heal. He believes that Jesus is the only one who can save his daughter, and Jesus has agreed. Jesus is going to come see his child. He will come. Everything will be okay now, but not so fast. I want you to experience the tension here. Let's press on. The rest of 24. 24 begins with, "And he went with him." But then something else happens. "And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him." Now, if you're Jairus, what's your perspective? What are you thinking right now? Get out of the way. The healer has got to get to my house to see my daughter. Nothing else matters when your kid is sick. Nothing else matters. Like we experienced this in our home. When Asher was 5 weeks old. I've told you this story before. 5 weeks old, and the medical team looked at us and said, he has got to get to a very acute ICU immediately. There's not time for the ambulance to take him from Colorado Springs all the way up to Denver. He's got to get somewhere now because your son is not going to make it if he doesn't. So when I read this story, I'm like, I know what this man feels. I know that he is heartbroken, and I know he is hoping against all hope that something can be done, because when you're in a situation like that, you refuse to believe that nothing can be done. Something can always be done to a parent who has a sick child. And we get angry because we're scared. Why won't you do something to help my kid? And nobody is able to help his kid except for Jesus. And now Jesus has agreed to come. But then all of a sudden the crowds come around him. And Jesus can't get through. But the only thing that matters to this dad is his little girl. And it's urgent. So that's what we're feeling. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. We read this story as a separate story. We teach this as a separate story. But if you're Jairus, this woman is an interruption. She's not the main character in the story. His daughter is for him. And who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. So she did. So hey, can we put that picture up? Do we got that? It's somewhere in my slide deck, I feel certain. I want you to see this. This is a picture. It's my favorite piece of artwork that I believe I've ever seen. And this hangs in the bottom floor of the church in Magdala. Magdala is the city where Mary Magdalene was from. She's Mary from Magdala. And this church, sort of an ecumenical church, like people come from all over and they're able to worship there and study and teach. And there's a guy there. And the guy there that is over in charge of this place is a Catholic priest. And he's amazing. Like, I follow him on Facebook. He does these devos every day where he walks beside the Sea of Galilee and teaches scripture. His name's Father Michael, and with the coolest accent you've ever heard. But the first time I saw this painting, we go downstairs into this room, and your cobblestone streets that were streets that Jesus walked on, that's the floor, goes right out to the shores of Galilee. This is the road that the fishermen would have brought their carts full of fish in on, and you're sitting, and this whole church is really dedicated to the women in Jesus' ministry. It's really fascinating and special place. And this painting, it's much bigger than this, hangs in the bottom of this. And this is a picture. The artist, his rendition of the woman who reached out and touched the hem of his garment. It's beautiful. Now I want you to notice something. When you look at the picture, and if you look at it long enough, you'll notice some things, but the most fascinating thing to me of all is we are witnessing, of course it's a painting in his imagination, how he imagined it to be, or she, I don't know who painted it, imagined it to be. But if you look at her hand, like her hand is wrinkled and her hand is aged and sick. But if you look at her fingertip, it's not. Like we're witnessing like the moment she is made whole. The moment that Jesus, right here in the scriptures, it says, and immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the disease. This is just an aside. I just thought it was a beautiful picture. In verse 30, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, Who touched me? Who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, are you out of your mind? There's people everywhere. Like everybody's touching everyone all the time. Like you guys saw the video of all the kids packed into the gym with black lights and glow-in-the-dark sticks, and David was doing some kind of weird dance that we all laughed at. Like I have no idea what that was about. That's sort of the situation minus the black lights and the glow-in-the-dark sticks. Everybody's packed in because everybody wants a piece of Jesus. And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear because she knew what she knew. That's me. I'm different now. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Can I just say to you, Jesus sees me even when the crowd overlooks me. Jesus sees you even when the crowd doesn't. Jesus sees you even when those in your own home don't see you. Jesus sees you when nobody else in your school you think sees you. Jesus sees you when you feel stuck in a job and nobody notices the work you do. Jesus sees you when the crowd overlooks you. I want you to notice that Mark does something remarkable here. Like an incredible writer. He shows us a couple things. He says, Jairus is named. What's this woman's name? They don't know. Jairus is named, the woman is not. Jairus is respected. This woman is rejected. She's an outcast. Jairus approaches publicly. She reaches out secretly. But Jesus stops for both. In the crowd pressing in around him, Jesus was able to distinguish between people brushing up against him and someone reaching out in faith. Do you think it's a coincidence? How long had she been bleeding? 12 years. How old is Jairus' daughter? Why does Mark do that? He's creating a literary mirror where he's showing us visible suffering and hidden suffering. And Jesus steps into both kinds. Both matter to him. Listen, God sees what no one else sees. Your prayers, your struggles, your tears. He notices when the world refuses to notice or overlooks. Things that sometimes look normal on the outside but are painful underneath. Jesus sees those things. Relational things that are invisible, that nobody else can see. A marriage that feels like it's quietly falling apart. Feeling alone when you're surrounded by people. A child who's walked away from the faith of their youth. A strained relationship with a parent or a sibling or a best friend. Some of the deepest suffering happens behind closed doors where nobody else sees it. But it's not just relational. Sometimes it's emotional and mental invisible suffering. They're common, but they're rarely visible. Depression that people hide behind a smile. Anxiety that can keep you up at night. Carrying grief that everybody else thinks you should be able to move on from. Feeling like there's nobody in the room that's ever experienced this. Feeling that you're failing as a parent. Maybe it's just me. But it's not just emotional and mental suffering either. Some people walk into church every week smiling on the outside, but barely holding it together on the inside. We struggle. Sometimes there's financial invisible suffering. People rarely talk about these struggles like publicly, living paycheck to paycheck, quietly drowning in debt, job that feels like a dead end, the pressure of providing for your family. Some people in this room are carrying financial stress that nobody else knows about. But then there's suffering that's physical and invisible. Not all illness is obvious. Some in this room are dealing with chronic pain, autoimmune diseases that nobody else knows about, migraines, long-term fatigue, infertility. Some suffering doesn't show up on the outside, but it drains the life out of you every single day. And then there's spiritual suffering that's invisible. Feeling distant from God. This is so relevant here. Like in a group of people that show up to hear preaching and to sing songs to Jesus, we pretend like everything is okay every week, most of us. But just tell me if one of these doesn't fit you or has fit you. Feeling distant from God, wrestling with doubt, which can I just say to a room full of teenagers? Like there is hardly a Christian alive today that gets to my age that hasn't wrestled with doubt. That's okay. Your Father in heaven can take it. Feeling spiritually dry, praying for years without seeing change. Some people are suffering in ways that even their closest friends don't know about. Invisible suffering is the kind of pain that nobody sees, nobody applauds, nobody notices. But the good news of this passage is Jesus notices. For 12 years, she was invisible to everyone else, but she wasn't invisible to Jesus. Jesus sees us, but seeing is not the hardest part. The hardest part is the waiting. And sometimes waiting feels like, just tell the truth, waiting feels like Jesus is late. Waiting feels like he's not showing up. Point number 2. Jesus is not late in my circumstances. What? Oh, jump back to verse 25. I want us to look at something again. Verse 25, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease. But wait a minute. Like, I love that. I do. I love it. But I thought this was about a guy named Jairus and his daughter. What happened to Jairus' daughter? Like, Jesus is on his way to Jairus' daughter. And she is, we've already been told, and Mark confirms that she is what? How's she described? At the point of death. When you're at the point of death, and there's been a delay in the story, what happens? Death. Why is he not running? Why is he messing with the crowd? This lady can wait 5 minutes. My daughter can't. Why doesn't he hurry? Because when you're living between desperation and resurrection, here's the one thing that I could just encourage you with right now. It's this. If you are living between desperation and resurrection, you're waiting for things to get better. Here's the guiding principle for your life and mine. Stay as close to Jesus as you possibly can. Look, this is just an aside. And so I'm not going to, don't build a whole theology on this, okay? But here's what I appreciate. Right, we haven't even gotten to the part where Jairus' daughter dies. We'll read that in a second. You all know what's happening, so that's not a surprise to anyone. But notice this, because I think this is so key. While all of this is happening, Jairus is still right there close to Jesus. And you and I have the opportunity, when life goes terrible, to pull back. You and I have the ability to do what some of the disciples do later in Jesus' ministry. I'll follow, but I'm going to pull back and follow from a safer distance. And here's why we do that. We'll hang back, and I'm not going to put as much faith in there, because if I don't put as much faith in the promises of God and the person of God, I can't be let down. And deep down, sometimes we are so scared that God is not going to come through for us, that we are scared to death to even pray in faith and pray the promises of God. Jairus follows closely. And while he was speaking, verse 35, golly, while he was still speaking, while he's telling this woman, your faith has made, go, Be well. Go live in peace. You're healed, while he's celebrating. And everybody's cheering like, oh my goodness, did you see what Jesus did? She's better now. 12 years, like we knew her. She was out there. She wasn't even allowed to be around us. And we've seen her for 12 years hanging out on the fringes of society. And you see that? All she did was touch his robe, but now she's better. And everybody's cheering and applauding and celebrating. And while that's happening, verse 35 is happening at the same time. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble this man any further? Why trouble the teacher any further? When Jesus seems late in my story, he is writing something bigger than I can see. 100% of the time, when Jesus seems late in your story, he is doing something that you cannot see and understand. But trust that he sees and he does understand. And I know it's hard. That's why it's important to stay close to Jesus. Jesus is coming with Jairus, but he stops, and while he's speaking to the woman, the girl dies. In that moment, Jairus is living exactly where many of us live, between desperation and resurrection. But we just don't know that resurrection is on the other side. The worst news has arrived, but the final word has not been spoken yet. Most commentaries or most sermons treat this as tension or drama, but Mark wants us to see the divine purpose in the delay. If Jesus has arrived immediately, the girl would have been healed. But because he was delayed, she experienced something better than healing. She experienced resurrection. Jairus was still with Jesus when the worst news of his life arrived. Your daughter is dead, but he's still standing right next to Jesus. That's not a small detail. Stay close to Jesus. That's the invitation for us, because God's big enough for our fear. And students, I want you to hear this. God's big enough for our fear. He's big enough for our anger. He's big enough for our questions. He's big enough in the middle of our pain to take the confusion. He's big enough to take the denials. He's big enough. He's big enough for all the questions that you will ever have. But the tendency for us is to push back instead of pushing in those moments. So when the midnight call comes, when the diagnosis arrives, when the tragedy strikes, not only is there nowhere better to turn than Jesus, can we just be honest with one another? There is nowhere else to turn than Jesus. It's not just that he's the best option on the table. He's the only option on the table. And Jairus knows this. Where else are you going to go? Who else can solve what's going on in my life? Who else sees the invisible pain? Who else knows how to handle what I'm going through? Only Jesus can step into the darkest moments of our life and speak a word that changes everything. For Jesus, resurrection was just around the corner. Jairus didn't know it yet, but Jesus did. You may not know what's around your corner, but you know this. If you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, resurrection is promised for all who belong to Christ and are loved by the Father. The worst thing, I love this. The worst thing is never the last thing for the people of God. Death does not have the final word. Desperation doesn't write the final chapter, because for those who trust Jesus, resurrection is always coming. So what feels like an interruption or feels like a delay in your life may actually be God preparing you for a bigger miracle than you can actually see or understand in this moment. Even in the middle of waiting. Even when fear whispers and bad news arrives, Jesus gives the command that changes everything. That's where faith comes in. Trusting him when it doesn't make sense. So, last point. Fear does not get the final word in my life. Now, that's a declaration that each of us get to make. Fear will not have the final word in my life. Look at verse 36. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, Jairus, the daddy, do not fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except for Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly, as one would. And when he entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside. Now, what kind of authority is that? This is family. Like they're there for a reason. Like, who's this guy showing up? But he speaks, and they all go outside. Put them all outside and took the child's father and mother. Can you imagine being the father and mother? And those who were with him, these 3 disciples. And he went in where the child was, and taking her by the hand, just picture it in your mind. And Jesus said to her, number one, we just recognize that Jesus is talking to a dead girl. There's purpose. There's a reason. And Jesus said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up. Mark's favorite word again, there it is. Immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. Fear looks at what's happening around us. Faith listens to what Jesus has said. 100% of the time in my life, when I am afraid, it is because I am looking at the circumstances around me. But faith always goes back to his word and reminds me what he has said. Jesus overhears the news. Your daughter is dead. He turns to Jairus and says, don't fear, only believe. This is important. Maybe the most important moment in Jairus' life, where Jesus locks eyes with him and says, do not fear. In this moment, and you and I will all have moments where we are given the choice and we are going to be given to fear, and we need to hear the word of God rushing over us and reminding us again, just as Jairus was, in this moment, do not fear, only believe, which means this: fear and belief are both a choice that we get to make. And Jairus chose belief over fear. The woman touches Jesus in secret. He stops, asks, listens. He calls her daughter. Then he says, your faith has made you well. Faith is seen and affirmed before it is rewarded. Jesus notices even hidden trust. Fear says it's over. Faith says, but Jesus is here. It can't be over if Jesus is here. No matter what's going on in my life, faith says it can't be over because Jesus is here. Jesus removes the voices of unbelief. In the house, he takes her by the hand. He speaks gently. Little girl, wake up. Little girl, arise. And she rises, and he feeds her. There's tenderness and there's authority. Faith is not pretending that everything is fine in your life. That's foolishness. Like to run around with the world's on fire and pretend like everything is great? That's madness. Everything's not great in your life. Everything's not great in the world. Faith is trusting Jesus because everything's not great in your life and everything's not great in the world. Jesus is in the middle of our reality when fear tries to dominate. Most of us are not living in resurrection moments. Most of us are living in between desperation and resurrection. Jairus was there. He's living there. His daughter's dying, and then she's dead. The woman was living there, suffering for 12 years, unnoticed, ignored, unseen. Maybe that's where many of us are today. But right in that space is where Jesus speaks, and he calls the woman daughter. He tells Jairus, do not fear, only believe. He speaks to the little girl, rise. He's tender, he's powerful, he's deliberate, he's personal. And he's in the middle of your story. Because the same Jesus who raised this little girl from the dead would one day walk out of the grave himself and rise again. What that means for those who trust him is this: that desperation is never the final chapter, and resurrection is always the last word. So what do we do? Just as we wrap up, just a reminder: first, stay near Jesus. Jairus stayed with him even when the worst news came. Don't pull away from God when it hurts. When life hurts, don't pull away, press in. Press in. Second, silence the voices of unbelief. Jesus put the mockers outside the room, and some of us in the room need to put the mockers outside of our rooms. Some of us have surrounded ourselves with people who tell us it can't. Some of us are surrounded by people who tell us it's never going to happen for you. Silence the voices of unbelief in your life. Sometimes faith requires us to stop listening to voices that say nothing is going to change. And third, listen for the voice of Jesus. In the middle of the chaos, he speaks, "Do not fear, only believe." Faith grows when we keep listening to him. Frederick Buechner, one of my all-time favorite quotes, said this in a book that I once read. And I love this. He said, "The worst thing is not the last thing. It's the next to last thing." The worst thing is not the last thing. It's the next to last thing. So if you're living between desperation and resurrection today, take heart. Your story's not over. Because for those who know and trust Jesus, desperation is not the final chapter in your story. And resurrection always has the last word. So, beloved, this morning, no matter where you are in your walk with Jesus, and that's assuming you have a walk with Jesus, and I don't want to assume anything. This morning, you may not have a relationship with Jesus. Maybe you're just checking this whole thing out. Maybe you've gone through a whole D Now weekend. Like I'm tiptoeing around it, but I don't know yet. Can I just say to you, what more do you need to see from him for you to give your life to him? I do not know it all yet either. Faith is not knowing it all or having it all figured out. It is saying, that's the one I'm going to follow. There's resurrection in his words, and I have not found resurrection anywhere else. So I'm going to follow him. And some of us this morning need to make the decision to follow him. Some of us this morning need to take the invisible things that we've been suffering with, and we need to get on our faces before the Lord, and we need to invite him. He sees it. We've been holding on to him so tightly because we're scared to pray about it, because we're scared he's going to let us down. Can I just encourage you to risk it? Take it to your Heavenly Father. Take your loneliness. Take the heartbreak. Take all of the I can'ts that you've ever said in your life and bring them to your Father in heaven. It is impossible to read this out of Mark and walk away and honestly say, he doesn't care. He cares, and he sees you. I'm going to pray. When I say amen, we're going to stand, we're going to sing. If you need to make a decision this morning, whether it's, I need to give my life to Jesus and trust him, I'll be down front this morning. I'd love to pray with you. Whether it's, hey, look, I need to follow in baptism. I need to take that step of obedience. Whether it's joining the church, or whether I just need somebody to pray with me because I've got some invisible things that I'm struggling with and I'd like somebody to pray with. I promise you, come kneel, people will pray with you. We love to pray. We don't know where else to go, and so we go to God. Whatever it is, you be obedient to what God's putting on your heart. Let me pray for us.